Desnos looks a lot very similar, and I'll go through it. It's again about your self-regulation being damaged, really, or not having been able to develop self-regulation, being prevented from meeting those developmental milestones that you should be meeting as a result of a traumatic event. And so we're looking at affect regulation, as I described, regulation to attention. So if someone has gone through, chronic trauma as a child, the capacity to attend to things, to think through things, is disrupted. But we're also talking here about dissociation and tendency to dissociate. So depersonalization, where you feel like it's not really happening to you. Not necessarily just during the trauma, they're talking about in general when you're dealing with stressful situations, you might have those experiences. And the whole range of dissociative experiences that you might have with complex trauma. They're looking at self-perception as well, not being able to regulate how you perceive yourself in the face of the other person, and that's very relevant to attachment theory, where, for example, you might have someone that's very angry with you, that's furious with you, and as soon as someone is very angry with you, you're a bad person, I'm bad. Every time someone is mad at me, I'm just bad, and not being able to differentiate between, oh, they're angry, and I'm reacting to them in that way. Or the other opposite is true too. I'm furious with someone else, therefore they're bad. There's no distinction between the feeling and the definition. You have problems with relationships. That's often around boundaries. So with Desnos, they're really looking at ability to differentiate yourself from other people. So it's quite similar again. It's about being able to differentiate your feelings, your thoughts from what's happening in relationship to the other person. But it's also impact on how you see the world and yourself as well in general. So things like, well, I've been sexually abused for a number of years, and the world is not a safe place. Or I'm contaminated by my experience, I'm an awful person. That's it. As I said, when they first looked at the DSM-4, they did field studies, large trials looking at the diagnosis of Desnos and comparing it with the diagnosis of PTSD. And what they found is that 92% of people who had Desnos had PTSD. There's a huge overlap, quite significant. I remember being surprised when I read the results of those field trials. And that's why what you see in the DSM-4 now is that you have only PTSD, and then you go down below PTSD and you have associated features. And in there you see a lot of the Desnos diagnostic criteria. They decided that they weren't separate disorders, there was too much overlap. Having said that, how that guides your treatment is interesting. Do you start thinking about these criteria, or do you start with PTSD? And that's what we'll talk in a minute. But a lot of overlap. Does that surprise you? 92% overlap? It's something I bring up again and again in workshops often when I talk about complex trauma, particularly when I do workshop on childhood sexual abuse, because I think the therapeutic field is divided often into camps. The PTSD camp, the complex trauma camp, if you want to call it that. And people in the PTSD camp will say, well, you need to attend to the re-experiencing symptoms, you need to attend to the fact that these people have nightmares, have very strong avoidant patterns, and until you deal with those, you're not going to get a patient that's well. And then you have other people that focus solely on these symptoms. So how do we deal with the affect dysregulation? How do we deal with the fact that you have a client group that has no boundaries with other people, or has difficult negotiating boundaries with other people. And until you do that, you're not going to get a well client. And the research is very clear at the moment that you actually need to do both. But it's how you do both with someone that presents with a whole range of issues.
In 6 sessions or less.
In 6 sessions or less. Well, I'll present you with a model that does it in about, it's all up, it's about 20 sessions, which surprised me, but it does have good results. So maybe it's possible for some clients. Not 6 sessions, so.